Hello and welcome to FM Academy's 12 Days of FileMaker 12. Today we are presenting the second bonus webinar on server performance. Kirk Bowman, Visionary of Value with MightyData, will lead today's topic. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the webinar question area and we will address as many as possible at the end of the presentation. With that said, Kirk, take it away.
Thanks, Susan. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this, the 14th in our 12 Days of FileMaker 12 series. Specifically today, as Susan mentioned, we're going to talk about FileMaker Server 12, and our focus is on performance. Before we do that, I want to dive in and tell you who FM Academy is. FM Academy is a consortium of 7 platinum members of the FileMaker Business Alliance who sponsor FM Academy. The goal of FM Academy is simply to provide evangelism and education for the FileMaker platform. The members of FM Academy are 360 Works from Atlanta, Georgia, Anvil Data Works from the Washington, D.C. area, IT Solutions from Philadelphia, Fiddlehead Software from Portland, Oregon, Logic from Connecticut, MightyData from the great state of Texas, and Skeleton Key from St. Louis, Missouri. So let's dive in. FileMaker Server 12. We have a new server. Yay! We're going to talk about 6 performance features, really almost categories, in Server 12 that have ramifications for performance. Now before we go further, I just want to clarify, if you're going to run out and buy FileMaker Server 12 because you have a slow solution and you think by installing it you're just all of a sudden going to get a faster solution, that may or may not be true. As I'll talk later, performance is a complex topic that involves many different aspects. The good news is we have more tools in our toolbox now to work on performance of our solutions. The first area is faster WAN performance. WAN, of course, is a wide area network, and FileMaker and FileMaker Go are being used over the WAN more and more each day. What we mean by a WAN is the client, whether it be Go or Pro, is in one location, and the server's in another. Typically, you're reaching out over the internet to access the server. What FileMaker Server 12 does is become more efficient at sending data over the WAN. And you'll see this particularly in 3 ways. First, finding data should be about 40% faster on average. The way this has been accomplished is they've optimized how FileMaker Server sends the data over the wire, meaning there are fewer round trips. It's going to send larger packets and fewer of them, and that helps contribute to better performance over the WAN. Second, if you've ever had a solution on a wide area network and you've tabbed into a field that had a value list, if the value list was very long, there would typically be a pause, sometimes of several seconds before the value list would appear. That behavior has been addressed in FileMaker Server 12. Value lists should display faster. And if it's a fairly long list, what FileMaker Server does is it's actually going to send down the first group of values in the list immediately and then send the rest as it has time to gather it. So it's really, in a sense, breaking up, sending the list into an initial burst and then the rest of the list. The appearance to the user in those cases is going to be the solution is more responsive. The third area dealing with WAN performance involves filtered portals. Filtered portals are a feature that was introduced in FileMaker Pro 11. A filtered portal simply allows you to create a calculation that will limit the records that would be displayed in a portal. While in FileMaker Pro 11, this helped us simplify the relationship graph. It helped us not add as many table occurrences. What we found was, in the real world, FileMaker Server would send down all the records to FileMaker Pro, and then FileMaker Pro would apply the filter. That's changed in Server 12. Now the filter is applied on the server, so all that goes down the wire is just the records that should be displayed in the portal after the filter has been applied. The Second area where performance has been improved in FileMaker Server is there's a more stable architecture. And this really boils down to we have more separate server processes now. There are now 5 separate processes that we can start or stop. The database server itself, the web publishing engine, and the admin server. The admin server is what the admin console communicates with. Those 3 were separate in FileMaker Server 11, but now in 12, 2 more have been separated out. Server-side scripting, or some people know it as Server-Assisted Script Execution, SASE. That's now a separate process. And there's a new feature in FileMaker Server 12 called progressive backups. Progressive backups, because of the way they work, can be a very consuming process, and so those are now separated out from the database server. The result of this is if you have a process that needs to be restarted because it's run away, you can address that without affecting the others. Probably the best example I can think of is server-side scripting. Server-side scripts can get away from you. For example, an infinite loop. Previously, if you needed to kill that, you would sometimes have to stop the database server and restart it, meaning all your users would lose access to the solution. Now you can actually restart that without affecting the database server. Now you can start and stop these processes using the command line. The command line is going to be the terminal on Mac OS, or it's going to be the command prompt or the DOS prompt on Windows. The general syntax for using the command line is FMS admin, then a command, and then the type of process that you want to apply the command to. The commands are fairly simple: start, stop, and restart. And obviously a restart is simply a stop followed by an immediate start. The types are the 5 processes that I mentioned earlier. Here they're listed: admin server, server, which is the database server itself, FMSE, which is the server-side scripting engine, XDBC, or the ODBC, and then web publishing engine. So let's jump over and take a look. I've got a Mac server here in remote desktop, and here I've already opened the terminal. In the terminal, I've actually preloaded a command. This is a command to actually restart the server-side scripting engine, which is something that is a fairly common occurrence, particularly in busier systems. So you can see again, FMS admin, this time I want to restart, and then I've got the name of a particular process, FMSE in this case. It asks me if I want to confirm. I'll go ahead and say yes. Wait a few seconds. And in that short period of time, FileMaker Server 12 actually stopped and restarted the server-side scripting engine. Now, if you need more information about the command line reference, the best place to go is going to be the FileMaker Online Help. So what I would do is load up the Online Help, which, by the way, you can get here through the admin console. You go to the admin console for FileMaker Server 12, go to the Help menu and choose FileMaker Server Help. It will then launch a browser window bringing up the Online Help. If you click on the navigation tree in the top left, it'll bring out an area where you can do a search. And if you're interested in learning more about the commands to stop and start and manage the various processes, just type in command line reference and do a search. Then it will bring up a whole section. It starts out by giving you general information about how to work with the command line. There are various options. And you can drill down into the specific commands that are available. So if you want to learn more about this, this is a great resource to go to. Backups. One of the most common things that can affect performance on a server are backups that take a long period of time. And so one of the goals with FileMaker Server 12 was to make backups more efficient. This can be summarized by saying we only want to back up what's changed. So let's talk about how this has played out in 3 different things that are backed up by server. First of all, you have a scheduled backup. Now, when I talk about a scheduled backup, what I'm referring to is when you switch over to the admin console and you set up a backup schedule that executes on a regular basis. That's what I mean by a scheduled backup. Scheduled backups will only back up databases that have changed. In FileMaker Server 11, when a scheduled backup ran, it would back up all the database files whether they changed or not. In 12, if a database file hasn't changed since the last backup, it will not make another copy of it. The way it's able to do this is using a feature in the operating system called hard links. Hard links allow the operating system to show a file in multiple folders, but only store the file once. Now, if one of those files if somebody goes into one of those locations and then makes a change, it will make a copy. But using hard links, backup time is faster because if the database hasn't changed, FileMaker Server won't make a new copy. It'll simply make a hard link to the last copy that hasn't changed. That also means we're going to consume less disk space. Ultimately, this means there's potential for backups to run faster, particularly if you have a large database that's referenced, either lots of text or lots of containers that are embedded. This can greatly improve backup performance, which means your users are not going to be waiting for backups to be completed. A second area where backup has been affected is in the remote container backup. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on the remote container feature in FileMaker Server. There was actually another webinar in our series on FileMaker Server specifically dealing with file management. There was also one specifically dealing with remote containers. So go to the FM Academy website, FileMakerAcademy.com, for more information. But remote containers is the feature in FileMaker Server that allows you to link database records to external files and store them all on the server. But because the files are not stored in the database doesn't grow in size. One of the benefits of remote containers is that FileMaker Server, when it backs up a database, also backs up the remote container data. But it's also smart. It will only back up files that have changed. So let's say, for example, you have a database for project management. It has a lot of digital files attached to the database using remote containers. Most of those files, the remote container files, are not going to change. And so when FileMaker Server executes the backup, again, it's only going to back up what has changed. Everything else will be managed through hard links. Again, this contributes to faster backup time, less disk space, and also another advantage of remote containers is, of course, the database size itself is smaller. The third area where backups have been improved is the progressive backup. And this is a new feature in FileMaker Server 12. Whereas scheduled backups only back up databases that have changed, and remote container backup only backs up container files that have changed. Progressive backup goes deeper. It only backs up bits that have changed. What that means is if you have a fairly large database, progressive backup is not going to back up the whole file. It's only going to back up or replace the parts that have changed. So how does this work? When you turn on progressive backup, it literally makes 2 full copies of the databases. And then, as I'll show you in just a second in the admin console, you set up an interval. And every, say, 5 minutes, FileMaker Server will look at the live database to see what's changed and update one of the 2 copies with the changes. So at any one point, you have a copy that's probably being updated and one that is current as of the last progressive backup. This is how progressive backups can leapfrog and always keep a current backup even when you have one progressive backup that's in the process of running. One of the nice things about progressive backup is it does run as a separate service, and it's actually, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, a 64-bit process. So let's take a look at the admin console. Progressive backups are going to be under the database server area. It's actually under folders, and the reason it's here is because folders is where you manage the location of backups. You turn on progressive backups, and it'll bring up a dialog. Progressive backups can take some processing from your server, and so this is simply warning you about this. You'll set up the path, and then you'll set the interval. Ideally, your backup strategy is going to be a combination of scheduled backups and progressive backups. Where progressive backups are really valuable, let's say you're backing them up every 5 minutes, you've always got one backup copy that is current as of 5 minutes ago. And so if there is an issue with the server, you should be able to revert back to a good copy of the database as current as 5 minutes ago or whatever interval you set. One point I want to make, and this actually is a point that was probably driven home in the FileMaker Academy webinar on file management for FileMaker Server, but I want to reiterate it. Always make a copy of a backup file. Never move them. Between scheduled backups using hard links and progressive backups, almost a constant churn, you're going to risk damaging or losing a backup if you try to use the actual backup file. So when you're in the operating system and you need to actually get at the backup, make a copy of it using the copy and paste commands in your operating system or duplicate it somehow. Never move the actual backup file. This is actually good practice for FileMaker Server 11 as well, but it's critical in FileMaker Server 12. So copy green, move, never do it. Let's talk about a 64-bit application. FileMaker Server 12 will install a 64-bit version of the server on a 64-bit OS. What does this mean? The biggest benefit is that we can now utilize more RAM for the cache on the server. With FileMaker Server 11 and the 32-bit version of FileMaker Server 12, the maximum size of database cache on FileMaker Server is 800 megabytes. With the 64-bit version of the server, the technical limit is 1 terabyte. There's not even hardware available right now that makes that possible. So essentially, with 64-bit, we have almost an unlimited size of the cache. Now, there is a sweet spot for the cache, and I'll talk to you about how to find that in just a second. Let's go back to the admin console. And again, under databases, down at the bottom you have a section for the database cache. And so I'm running on a stock Mac Mini with this particular server. It has 4 gigabytes of RAM. I'm just running, this is a demo server that I use, so I've just left it at the minimum 128. But you'll notice I can increase the cache size up to 2 gigabytes, 2,048 megabytes. Now, the database cache, its purpose is to load data into memory and then access that memory more frequently, which should be faster than always having to go to disk for the data. You can imagine a beefy server, you might have 16 gigabyte, 24 gigabyte, 48 gigabyte worth of RAM. You can see that the database cache is going to grow quite a bit. And in general, the maximum size of the database cache is going to be about half your installed RAM, give or take. How do you know if you're hitting the sweet spot for your database cache? You're going to go over to the statistics. And we're going to talk more about statistics in a minute, but the one that's going to tell you whether you're hitting a sweet spot is going to be your cache hit percentage. What this means is it tells you the percent of the time that FileMaker Server is going to retrieve data, what percent of that is it going to the cache to get the data versus going to disk. And ideally you want this number, and the number we're really focused on is the average. We want that average to be between 95 and 100%. On a 64-bit OS, once you hit 100%, you want to start watching the cache unsaved percent. You want to try to keep that number low. Ideally, you want your cache hit percentage to be like between 95 and 100, and you want your cache unsaved percent to be like between 0 and 10. If it starts getting above 10 or higher, you may actually have too much cache allocated on a 64-bit OS. So the best practice for a 32-bit OS is just max it out at 800 megabytes. But on a 64-bit OS, you really need to watch your statistics and find the sweet spot for your particular server. Now, the operating systems that FileMaker Server 12 supports, it supports the Mac OS 10.6 and 10.7. On 10.7, it does run as a 64-bit. And not only does it support the regular OS, but it also supports Mac OS X Server. On the Windows side, you can run FileMaker Server 12 on Windows 2003 Service Pack 2, but be aware it's only going to be a 32-bit version. There is no 64-bit version available for 2003. On 2008, you can run 64-bit version. Typically, you're going to wind up with a 32-bit version on 2008 SP2 or 64-bit on R2. So basically, Mac OS 10.6 or 10.7, Windows 2003 or 2008, but be aware which version you're running. And if 64-bit is important, make sure the OS you're using is a 64-bit OS. The other thing I want to point out, we talked about separate processes earlier. Another benefit we get out of 64-bit is that some of the processes are now completely 64-bit. The database server, the web publishing engine, the ODBC or XDBC, and then also progressive backup. All of those are 64-bit, which leaves two 32-bit processes, the admin server and server-side scripts. By the way, it's a good question someone might ask is, well, why is server-side scripts not 64-bit? The reason is server-side scripts essentially FileMaker Pro built in to the server to run scripts. FileMaker Pro is 32-bit, so the server-side scripting is also 32-bit because it's mimicking a FileMaker Pro client on the server. I mentioned remote containers earlier. Not only do remote containers help you as far as your backups when it comes to performance, they also help you if you're using media that can take advantage of a progressive download. Typically, these are going to be movie files or PDF files. The advantage is with the progressive media download is FileMaker Server will start streaming that container data down to the user, and the user can still do their work. And then, for example, with a movie, once it gets enough of the movie, it'll start playing it, even though it hasn't even downloaded the entire movie yet. Also, remote containers give you the benefit of thumbnail creation for images. So if you have large images that are using a remote container, but you only need a small picture of it, say in a list view, FileMaker Server is going to create a thumbnail on the server and then just send that small thumbnail down the wire. So again, another way you're getting the benefit of remote containers. One thing I will mention about progressive media or interactive content, as you may hear it called sometimes, if you're going to use SSL encryption, progressive media download is not supported. So in other words, if you are required in the admin console under security, there's a checkbox for secure connections to FileMaker database server. If you enable that, then you're not going to get the benefit of the progressive download of your container data. And that's simply because of the way SSL works. It's not possible. So just be aware of that one limitation. Moving on, number 6, faster web publishing. The bottom line is the web publishing engine in FileMaker Server 11 and earlier has some bottlenecks. They addressed that, and now web publishing in certain circumstances can be up to 65% faster. Let's talk about a couple of ways that that is actually happening. First of all, the custom web publishing engine, CWP engine, has been completely rewritten. And the benefit is it can handle more simultaneous requests. It will not bog down near as much when it's under heavy simultaneous load. In fact, if we go to the admin console and go to the web publishing area, you'll now see some new settings under the web publishing session limits. Previously, there wasn't even the ability to set a limit for custom web publishing. Instant web publishing has been at 100 in FileMaker Server 11, but in 12 they now added the ability to actually set how many simultaneous custom web publishing sessions there are, and the high limit is 200. That's a significant change. The other thing that's been done is they've improved session management, particularly for custom web publishing. And the short version is they're now applying some new caching technology on the server, which allows the server to manage sessions more efficiently and, again, contributes to better performance. So those are the 6 areas where FileMaker Server 12 can specifically impact your performance. In addition, there are some tools that you can use to actually help you diagnose and troubleshoot performance issues with your solutions. And so we're going to continue with our discussion of Server and look at some of those tools. As a reminder, performance is complex. It's a combination of hardware, software, which includes the operating system, and the database architecture, solution architecture. In fact, if you want to get an idea of how complex performance can be, go back to the online help and do a search this time for improving performance. And here there's about 10, 12 bullets that talk about just general things you should do. So before you can even get into specific troubleshooting, you ought to look at these things. For example, this is one that I typically can run into in small businesses, but in general you don't want to install FileMaker Server on somebody's workstation. You want it to be on a dedicated machine. In addition, you want to avoid running FileMaker Server on a server that's also acting as an email server or a print server or a file server. And there's other recommendations here. Another common one that can get you into trouble is antivirus software. It's okay to have antivirus software on the server, but there's a couple things you need to do. First of all, you need to disable the automatic scan. You need to set it up to scan, say, once every 24 hours during the night. And 2, you need to omit certain database folders, such as where the databases are stored and progressive backups are stored, so the antivirus software doesn't actually corrupt those. And there's other things here. We could probably spend an entire webinar on these topics. And this is just general discussion. My point is, just this short list should help you understand how performance is a complex topic. But let's go on and talk about tools in the admin console, specifically statistics and the log viewer. Now, server statistics is available in the admin console in both table and graph views. So here we are looking at the server statistics. You'll notice at the top it shows us some basic connection statistics. Probably the 2 that are going to be, well, I guess any of these could be beneficial depending on your solution, but you're going to be able to see how many custom web publishing clients, how many FileMaker clients, instant web publishing, and then ODBC. By the way, FileMaker Go is grouped in to FileMaker clients. Where we're really interested in, though, is at the bottom, the database statistics. I talked a minute ago about the cache hit percentage, and that's probably the one that's most important. You'll notice here, the average cache hit percentage for this server is 100. Because the server is used so lightly, it's pretty easy to get there. But again, for your server, that's your goal. The cache unsaved percentage. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't want that to be too high. The higher it gets, the more unsaved data you have in the cache. You want to try to keep that number low. Disk kilobytes per second for read or write. Give you an idea of how busy the disk is. Probably one of the most important statistics is the elapsed time call, and this is a hard one to understand because it's measured in milliseconds. What you need to know is elapsed time call measures how many milliseconds it is taking per call for FileMaker Server to finish a call, and it's hard to know exactly what is the definition of one call. A single script that you run in FileMaker Pro could create many calls on the server. But because it's measured in milliseconds, you'll notice here the number is 866,410. What you need to know is that is 0.86 seconds. It takes 1,000,000 milliseconds to equal 1 second. So when you see this number, if you see anything over 500,000, you know that you're already up to a half a second. If you see anything over 1,000,000, you know you're already up to a second delay. And there's other statistics here dealing with the network and so on and so forth. In addition to looking at statistics, you can actually look at a graph of the stats. Now, I don't have any statistics to graph here because the server has been fairly inactive, but I at least want to show you how this works. When you click on the statistics button, you can choose the different types of stats you want to look at. It's going to be really hard to look at all the stats at once. Generally, you're going to want to look at 2 or 3 at a time. So for example, a lot of times I'll want to look at the elapsed time per call, the wait time per call, and the I/O time, meaning the disk time per call. I want to look at those together. So they're all measured in milliseconds per call. So when I click OK, you'll notice I get the word microseconds over on the left-hand side. There is a color key at the bottom that shows you what's being measured, and you can even change the time reference. So for here, we're looking at 10 minutes. Let's say we want to make it a 30-minute window or a 5-minute window. The benefit of having the graph immediately in Admin Console is it allows you to jump on and look at it right away. It also helps you to visualize and compare 2 or 3 statistics to each other. Now let me show you something else. Right now we're measuring in milliseconds. Let's go ahead and add a couple more. In this case, let's go ahead and add the disk kilobytes per second. Now you'll notice over on the right-hand side, now we've kind of got 2 scales going. We've got one scale on the left for microseconds, and then another scale on the right for kilobytes per second. This is one of the things to be aware of. When you start mixing statistics that actually measure different units, you want to pay more attention to what it is you're looking at. Now, let me show you something else you can do with regard to the server statistics, which is you can look at it on a client-by-client basis. Right now, we're looking at it for the entire server as a whole. But you can also look at it on a client-by-client basis. There are no clients listed on the server right now, but if there were, let's say we had 50 users, they would all be listed here, and I could see how many remote calls were being executed by that client, how many were in progress, what's the elapsed time for each, how much I/O time or disk time, and so forth. You can even log client statistics so that you can come back later and analyze them if you check this box. Generally, when you're looking at client statistics, you're going to need to either log them or pause the screen, because otherwise they're constantly churning and it's going to be hard to get any meaning out of the data. Since we are talking about performance, you should be aware that enabling client statistics will have an impact on performance on your server, simply because it takes a lot more processing to capture that much data. So the only time it will log or display client statistics is when this particular tab is open in the admin console. The minute I switch back over to the server statistics, it stops logging client statistics. If you want to learn more about server statistics, you can go again to the online help. This time, search for Viewing Server Statistics. And you're going to get some tables explaining in more detail what the particular statistics mean, and you're also going to be able to find more information about how to view the statistics in the admin console, both in the table view and in the graph. Now, when we're looking at statistics in the admin console, we're looking at stats in near real time. However, to really truly diagnose performance issues, you really need to be able to get into the logs. You can get a copy of the log and pull it off the server. It's just a text file. And you can then bring that log into FileMaker or a text editor and work with it. But you can look at the logs right online. And so there's a built-in log viewer in the admin console. Right underneath statistics is the log viewer. There are about 6 different types of logs for FileMaker Server. If you want to look at the log, you first need to tell Server which log you want to look at. The one that's most common is server events. That's the one that's going to tell you the most information about what's going on with the server as a whole, particularly if there's errors or things that aren't working properly. So I'm going to choose server events. And as soon as I do that, it brings up a few log entries. You'll notice that I can filter it by the type of log entry. Errors are going to be the ones you want to pay attention to. Warnings and information are generally not things that are going to cause you to make some type of performance tuning change. You can also filter this by date, because the log will get larger over time. You can even filter it down using a keyword. So for example, I'll type in max, hit refresh, and it will now show me all the log entries that have the word max or begin with the letters MAX. I can even export this if I need to save it for further review. Saves it out as tab separated, so we'll go in here and say server log and save that out. So knowing how to view the logs in the admin console, particularly with now the ability to filter it by type, by keyword, and date, gives you a lot of ability to go into the log and kind of dig to find what you need. The one thing about logs is, particularly on busy servers with lots of clients, lots of solutions, the logs will grow very quickly. Now let's take a look at where you manage the logs in FileMaker Server. There's actually a logging tab. You can set the connection interval for the statistics. It's set by default to 15 seconds. Generally, you don't want to reduce it down unless you're really trying to troubleshoot, because the lower this number, the more processing time is accumulated just to carry the statistics or capture the statistics. You can set the size of the log. Generally, 40 megabytes is a pretty good size. And you'll notice this is for the event log. The event log is always on. You can also log the access log, which gives you the list of who accessed the server when, which database did they open, and also the usage statistics. On a busy server, I always want to have usage statistics on, because then I can take those logs, look at them offline, and get more information. Particularly, a lot of times if you have an event, say something got really slow at a certain period of time, being able to look at the usage statistics offline is a great detective tool to try to figure out what's going on. In fact, let me flip over here to a FileMaker 12 database, just kind of show you what you can do with the logs. Here's a FileMaker database. I've actually imported the usage statistics log from a live server, and I just want to show you some graphs here. Particularly, let's take a look at this bottom one which is showing the elapsed time per call, the wait time per call, and the I/O time per call. You'll notice the graph is currently set up from 0 to 500,000, which is half a second. And so you can see here that during the day at certain points, the wait time got above 500,000, meaning the wait time per call was above half a second. That happened a couple times. You can see over here we even got to a point where the elapsed time got higher. So this is what you can do with the logs. You can actually create tools to view the graph offline, which is similar to the graphing tool that's actually available in the admin console itself. If you want to learn more about log entries, you can, again, go to the online help and search for viewing log. And it'll bring up viewing log file entries. It will tell you what the 6 different logs that FileMaker Server maintains are, and then goes into more functionality about how to use the log viewer and how to understand the logs. All right, so that's an overview of FileMaker Server 12 and performance. Let me tell you about some resources you can go to get more information. Resource number 1 is going to be the FileMaker Server 12 Getting Started Guide. The way you can find that is if you go to the admin console and choose under the help menu FileMaker Server Product Documentation, it'll bring up a web page and you can download the PDF for the Getting Started Guide. Another resource, which should surprise you, is the online help. The way to get to the online help, again, the admin console, just go to the help menu and choose FileMaker Server Help, and it will launch a web page where you can access the online help. And then third, a couple of our colleagues in the FileMaker community wrote some FileMaker Server 12 technical narratives. They're available on fmforums.com. Stephen Blackwell and William DeCore wrote a collection of 6 PDFs that go into more detail on different aspects of FileMaker Server. For example, there's one on the processes, and their PDF goes into even more detail about how to use the command line. I encourage you to seek those out. Probably the quickest way to find them would be to just go Google FM Forums FileMaker Narrative, and it should bring up this web page. And there are 6 different PDFs, and you can download them all as a zip file. These are extremely good information, very well written. I also expect that FileMaker Inc. will be releasing a FileMaker Server 12 configuration guide in the future. That, when it comes out, will also be a great resource. So, hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. We're about to go into a Q&A period, so if you've got a question, you haven't already put it into your GoToWebinar control panel, please do that. Just kind of some housekeeping information before we get to the questions. First of all, if you want to stay in touch with MightyData, there's a few ways to do that. You can always send us an email to info@mightydata.com. We have a blog on our website. It's fairly active. We post around a half a dozen articles each month. You can find that at www.mightydata.com/blog. And we also have a pretty active Twitter feed. And you can find us on Twitter @MightyData. The final webinar in our 12 Days of FileMaker series is going to be next Tuesday, the Tuesday after Memorial Day, May 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It will be on new accessibility features in FileMaker Server and FileMaker Pro 12. These are specifically features that allow those who may be, for example, visually impaired to be able to interact with the database. And so we're going to have a presenter from IT Solutions who's going to cover those new features. You can always get more information by going to www.filemakeracademy.com or MightyData.com. So with that, remind you once again, if you find these webinars beneficial, please reach out to the FM Academy member in your area, 360works, MightyData, IT Solutions, Anvil DataWorks, Fiddlehead Software, Skeleton Key, or Keologic. And with that, we'll go to our questions.
All right, Kirk, I have the first one up. Is there any difference between FileMaker Server, the regular version, and the development license? This user just uses FileMaker Pro and would like to know if both are equal.
Okay, that's a good question. I'm going to switch back over to the admin console. So first, let me define what the developer license for FileMaker Server is. FileMaker Inc. has a free TechNet community. You just go online and sign up with your email address and you get access to various technical resources and forums. Once you're a member of TechNet, you can pay a $99 fee, and that will get you access to a development version of FileMaker Server Advanced. The only difference between the development license and a regular license is the number of simultaneous users. So let me find, if you go under configuration to server licensing and click on change a license key, what you're going to find when you have a development license down here, it's going to say FileMaker connections limited to 3, ODBC limited to 3, the same for IWP and CWP. So it really is just a development license, and you get all the functionality, you're just limited to 3 simultaneous clients.
All right. So one of the questions was that you had said that it runs at 1 million milliseconds per second, but they thought they misheard that because that didn't sound right. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let me clarify what I said. We're talking about statistics or particularly elapsed wait time. This is measured. What you need to know is these numbers, it takes 1 million of these to equal a second. And so if we go to the graph, I think where I may have confused you is I said milliseconds. Maybe the term microseconds is what I meant to say. But it is 1 million of those to equal 1 second. So it's being measured at a very, very small unit.
All right. I think that kind of ties into this next question. How did you test to see that the WPE was up to 65% faster?
How do you test that? There are some tools available that will simulate a load on a web server. I want to say there's one that's available from the same group that does the Apache web server. So you could certainly set up 2 servers and kind of use those load balancing tools to compare things. Getting a hard statistic is going to be fairly difficult unless you actually set up a lab environment and measure it. Even if you can't measure it down the exact percentage, under particularly high volume loads, you should notice a difference with 12. I've noticed it, and I was simply I'm doing a session at DEF CON on PHP web publishing. And so I've just been using the web publishing engine to prepare my materials for that, and it just feels faster. I think you're going to notice a substantial difference, but obviously you could certainly create a lab environment to measure it.
Is there a specific name of these load testers?
I knew that was coming. I could follow up with that. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
All right. So let's move on to a different question. We'll try to answer that one offline. Brent will get in touch with you. Can Dropbox folders or the equivalent be used by FileMaker Server for scheduled or progressive backup folders?
Can they? Yes. Should they? Probably not. I would say, number one, it's going to create more network traffic, particularly with progressive backups. 2, I really don't want any other process touching my backups. I really want those folders to be left where they are on the hard drive. And then if I want to use something like Dropbox to move the databases offline, then I might write, say, a shell script to copy those from the database folder over to the Dropbox folder. Or if your goal is offline backups, you might actually look at SafetyNet, which is a plugin from 360works. It's actually a free plugin that will allow you to push copies of your backups up to S3, which is Amazon's storage technology. There are, some per cent gigabyte charges for that, but you can have offline backups for $10 or less a month using that tool. So the short answer, can you? Yes. Would I? Probably not.
Okay, so here's another one for you. If I have enough RAM that exceeds the size of my database, will the entire database be in RAM, and if so, will it be very fast?
The cache, the size of the cache, so I think that's what you're referring to. If we go back to the Databases tab where you can set the size of the cache. Let's say my database is 2 gigabytes. Just because I have a cache set at 2 gigabytes does not mean the entire 2 gigabyte database is going to be loaded into RAM, particularly with multiple users. There's another concern you get into if you literally are trying to run the whole database in RAM. Kind of the reason you're thinking about that is because RAM is much faster. However, there's a downside. If there's a server event and the server goes down, whatever data that is in the cache that hasn't been saved would be lost. So again, I think the proper way to use the cache is to go back to the statistics and look at your cache hit percentage. You want that to be at 100%, between 95 and 100% consistently, and then after that, you want to watch your cache unsaved percentage and try to keep that as low as possible.
Okay, so next question. Can you use Windows 7 Professional for FileMaker Server 12 as you could for FileMaker Server 11?
You can. You probably noticed I didn't list Windows 7 as one of the operating systems. The reason is you can run FileMaker Server 12 on Windows 7 essentially for development purposes. I would not use Windows 7 for a production server. But the short answer is yes, you can do it, but it's not recommended for a production server. I would only use it for development.
Okay, next question. Is it possible to have in the same machine both FileMaker Server and FileMaker Pro as a client?
Read the question again, Susan.
Is it possible to have on the same machine both FileMaker Server and FileMaker Pro as a client?
You could, however, I would only do it in a very specific instance. If you're thinking about essentially running server on the same computer as somebody who actually uses FileMaker Pro to interact with the database on a daily basis, I would say don't do that at all. That's extremely dangerous. About the only time that we typically install FileMaker Pro or FileMaker Pro Advanced on the server, when we do that, it's so that we have a copy local. So if we need to do maintenance on the databases, we have a copy local and can do that. But we never use it in a production situation. So I guess I would say, can you do it? Yes. Should you do it? No, unless it's for a specific purpose, such as maintenance on the databases. And typically when we do that, we're actually turning the server off at that point.
Okay, you said in your presentation that you should turn off the file and print sharing on FileMaker Server. However, with that, the server cannot see the databases to upload from, for example, a laptop, or is there something that we're not understanding?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of misconception there, or misunderstanding. First of all, what I said was when you install FileMaker Server and it runs as a service on either Mac or Windows, You do not also want to be running the file sharing or print sharing or email sharing services that come with, say, Mac OS X server or a Windows server. You want to turn those off. The reasons is a database server is very resource intensive, so is print sharing, file sharing, and email sharing, and so you're going to wind up competing for resources. Second, by isolating FileMaker Server, if something happens with the email server that takes the server down, it doesn't put your databases at risk. So not only are we isolating so that we get better performance because only one service is using resources, but we're also isolating for stability so that one service doesn't take another down. Now, you mentioned uploading and downloading the databases. I assume you're talking about in the admin console. If you go to the database, the list of databases on the server, you can actually both upload a database to the server and download a database to the server through the admin console, and that has nothing to do with file sharing. Furthermore, sometimes people confuse file sharing with FileMaker Pro being able to access a database over the network. Those are two different things. So the short answer is turn file sharing off because it doesn't have any negative effect as far as what you're able to do either uploading, downloading databases, or with FileMaker Pro.
Okay, the next question. Can I set the log file to be on a different disk, and will this improve performance?
No. The log file is going to be in a set location. All you can do is control the size of the log file. And if you were to put, say, the log file on a network share, you're actually going to slow down performance. Generally, you want to have your log files right on the system drive. That's going to be the fastest, particularly when FileMaker Server is logging data every 15, 10 seconds. You really want that to be fairly fast.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here about IWP. The first one is, has the IWP engine been rewritten or is it faster?
IWP has not been, there are not significant differences with the IWP in FileMaker Server 12. Most of what has been addressed has been custom web publishing with PHP.
And then the follow-up question to that is, what's the difference between custom web publishing and instant web publishing?
Let me see if I can show you the difference. Kind of show you another feature of Server here. There is a test page that comes, it's a built-in feature in the admin console. So if you go back to the admin console under the server menu, there is an option to open up the test page. And when you do that, you can test various technologies. The way I've got my server set up, I actually can test instant web publishing and custom web publishing. Let me start out. Let me just open the sample database using FileMaker Pro so you can see what it looks like. So this is a project management database that is the new sample that comes with FileMaker Server. Let me show you instant web publishing. And if I resize the screen a little bit, hopefully this will give you an idea of how instant web publishing is essentially trying to take FileMaker Pro and put it into a browser, but there are significant limitations. I don't have time to go into those, but that'll give you an idea of what instant web publishing is. Let me go back to the server start page and I'll show you what PHP looks like. All right, looks like PHP is not working on my server at the moment. But to answer your question, IWP tries to mimic FileMaker Pro in a browser. There are some limitations to it. The best use of IWP is when you need to share the FileMaker data with users who need to be able to search, add, edit, delete records, and it's a smaller group. Custom web publishing is really designed to take FileMaker data and make it a part of a website, and the user is never going to know the data is coming from FileMaker. Instant web publishing, it looks like FileMaker. With custom web publishing, it just looks like any standard web page because it's all being done behind the scenes with PHP.
Okay, I think let's try to get in one last question here. Can you, Kirk, discuss daisy chaining multiple FileMaker servers in multiple locations?
All right, there's two ways I can interpret the question. One would be actually running more than one FileMaker server. They're each hosting separate databases. That is done occasionally, and there are some third-party products that can help you synchronize databases between multiple servers. The other way I could take that question is you do have the ability, when you're doing web publishing with FileMaker, to actually split out different components onto multiple servers. Probably the most common instance is when you have one server running FileMaker Server and another server that's running the web publishing engine. That's a great way to separate those processes to get better performance. Those are the two things I can think of. If you mean load balancing, like setting up a server farm, that's not something that FileMaker Server supports. So I'm not sure which of those scenarios you're talking about, but that's kind of a quick summary of how you might be asking the question. Hopefully I gave you the answer you've written.
Server, it was clarified that he meant server farms.
FileMaker, as far as multiple database servers, you're going to wind up setting up independent servers and using a third-party product to synchronize the data between them.
Okay, well, we have a couple of questions left that we were not able to get to, but please look for the answers to that, as well as a post of the recording of this and some notes from Kirk on the FileMaker Academy website at FileMakerAcademy.com. You can also catch it on our blog at MightyData.com/blog. Thanks so much for joining us.